At the Battle of Macragge in 745 M41, the organism designated the Swarmlord spent a single day dismantling one of the most formidable Space Marine chapters in the Imperium of Man.Marneus Calgar isn't an easy target. Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, centuries of warfare behind him, body reconstructed around layers of superhuman augmentation, tactical instincts refined across campaigns on 100 worlds. At Cold Steel Ridge, the Swarmlord didn't fight him so much as study him, responding to each defensive arrangement Calgar established, finding the point where the line bent, killing Commander Aloyseus of the Honor Guard, and hacking the chapter master down. Calgar lost both hands. He survived because his veterans physically removed him from the engagement, while the Honor Guard bought the time with their lives. The Swarmlord shifted to the polar fortresses within the same campaign. Captain Invictus of the Ultramarines' elite First Company held there with everything he had. By the time the assault concluded, Invictus was dead. The entire First Company was dead. Official Imperial reports listed the Swarmlord itself as slain in the final fighting, a detail that becomes less conclusive once you understand what the Swarmlord actually is. That was its opening entry in the recorded history of High Fleet Behemoth's invasion of the Ultramar sector. 1 day, 2 engagements, 1 chapter master's hands, 1 company commander. A complete First Company. And Macragge wasn't the beginning of its record. The Kala Empire appears in its list of conquered civilizations. The Brynar species no longer exists anywhere in the galaxy. The Orc Wa Gorgluk was consumed entirely, by fleet and by swarm, until nothing remained to rebuild around. During High Fleet Leviathan's expansion into the Holder sector in 997 M41, the Swarmlord directed the absorption of more than 24 worlds in 4 months, including Talon, the chapter planet of the Storm Falcon Space Marines, and Indra Giga, site of a major orbital shipyard for the entire region. It absorbs civilizations the way a maintenance crew clears debris. Its weapons are 4 bone sabers. Each one carries a crystalline growth at its core, a mineral with no classification in Milky Way geological catalogs, something brought from outside the galaxy's boundaries. Each saber can shear through adamantium. Each one cuts through force fields as though they aren't there. The Swarmlord can parry with them at a speed that Codex Tyranids describes as making it all but impossible for opponents to land strikes. 4 blades, crystalline and alien, moving faster than the threat assessment can process. The Fandom Wiki's entry, drawing directly from multiple editions of Codex Tyranids, uses the same language across printings. The most powerful synapse creature ever created by the hive mind. Another passage from the same source chain, as old as the Tyranid species itself, the ultimate conduit through which the hive mind's implacable will is enforced. This creature is to a hive tyrant what a hive tyrant is to a termagant. That formulation appears verbatim in the Codex text. It's also, technically, immortal. When the Swarmlord dies, the hive mind revives it on one of the hive's ships, carrying forward every memory, every tactical experience, every defeat, and every kill from every prior life, making it demonstrably stronger than the version that died. This is confirmed across multiple Codex editions and secondary lore sources in identical language. When it dies, the hive mind revives it with all past memories, experience, and knowledge, in essence making it more powerful than in its last life. Each death is theoretically an investment in the next version. This immortality mechanism is where the community's frustration starts. Ortan Cassius of the Ultramarines killed it at the Battle of Colavan. It was resurrected, as the Lexicanum notes, on one of the hive ships. Calgar defeated it again at the Battle of Ikar 4 in 992 M41 during the Second Tyrannic War. The Swarmlord gravely wounded Commander Dante of the Blood Angels at the devastation of Baal around 999 M41 before Dante killed it in personal combat, and it came back. The same comment keeps surfacing across years of forum discussion. The Swarmlord is introduced as the apex of Tyranid threat, the pinnacle of the hive tyrant strain, an organism as old as the species, and it crawls out of the darkness regularly to get brought down by whoever needs a narrative win this week. Mark Collins' 2020 Black Library short story, Duty Unto Death, published in the Nexus and Other Stories anthology, puts the Swarmlord against a small group of custodian guard on a feral world, the full force of a Tyranid hive fleet descending around them. The Fandom Wiki's entry for the story describes it precisely. A small group of custodians travel to a feral world to guard a treasure beyond imagining. As the full wrath of a Tyranid hive fleet descends, the warriors will have to contend with both the alien threat and their own doubts. Track of Words reviewed it as a short and action-packed story, which really plays up the one-man army aspect of the Custodes as they battle wave after wave of increasingly deadly Xenos. The Swarmlord was present and operational. By the story's conclusion, it had renewed contact with the hive mind and the approaching fleet, an ending that reads less like a decisive Tyranid defeat and more like a tactical withdrawal, the engagement having achieved whatever purpose it was sent for. The custodians held a feral world. The pattern continues. The frustration the community directs at the Swarmlord is real, and it's earned, but it's aimed at the wrong target. The Swarmlord isn't the apex of the Tyranid species. Codex Tyranids is explicit on this point. Its reincarnation appears to be a stress-induced response that is triggered only when the conventional strategies of the hive mind fail and greater resourcefulness and tactics are needed. When the standard toolkit breaks down, the hive mind reaches for the Swarmlord. It's a specialized instrument for situations that have exceeded the routine. Something decides that a situation has exceeded the routine. Something determines which planet gets the Swarmlord and which gets a standard invasion wave of Carnifexes and Hormagaunts and artillery beasts. Something designs every bioform in the fleet, encodes the templates into the species' biological architecture, and processes the tactical data that flows back from every engagement. Something lives on those hive ships, the same ships where the revival process occurs. That something is the most powerful organism in the Tyranid species. It's also the least discussed entity in 40 years of Warhammer 40k publications. It lives inside the hive ships. It has no official model. Most players can't name it. The formal designation is Norn Queen, hyphenated, in Lexicanum and most official sources. The inquisitorial xenobiological catalogs that classify it give it a Latin designation, Tyrannicus primogenitor, the original producer, the first maker. In informal imperial records, in the notes of Magos biologists who have examined recovered genetic material from stripped worlds and tried to reverse engineer what could have produced the sequence diversity they're looking at, it appears under another name, the Splicer Beast. The Lexicanum records all three. None of them have appeared on a Games Workshop product label. She lives inside the hive ships, in chambers described across multiple source editions as enormous. Her integration with the ship is so complete that the question of where she ends and the vessel begins is unresolved in the lore. The hive ship is, in a meaningful biological sense, either her body or her environment, and the distinction may not be meaningful. GW's own design team stated this constraint directly in an official Warhammer community article published on August 31, 2023, tied to the 10th edition launch. She is too valuable to be planet-side. The practical corollary is that a creature hardwired into a vessel that would dwarf any Imperial battlefield can't be rendered as a 28mm model and placed on a table. The game can't contain her. The chambers she occupies can't be represented by a gaming mat and terrain features. She doesn't visit war zones. War zones are conducted in her vicinity, and she observes from inside the hive ship, processing results. The one sustained physical description of a Norn Queen in published Black Library fiction comes from Graham McNeil's Warriors of Ultramar, archived in community records because GW hasn't chosen to widely amplify it. Clusters of eggs spill from rows of ovipository orifices along its flanks. Fluid-filled depressions on its upper surface writhe with maggot-like larvae. Fetal sacs hang like ripe fruit from umbilical branches, and huge larval teleporter worms burst from incubator pouches on the Norn Queen's sides. Simpler bioconstructs may emerge already in their adult form, to be gathered and directed by the horde of creatures that feed and serve the Norn Queen. Read that description without the context, and it could be a room. It's a room, a chamber in which everything visible is part of the organism filling it, producing other organisms continuously. Every surface in active biological function. No claws, no combat profile, no 8 feet of chitinous plating built for killing. The Norn Queen isn't built for killing. She is built for making. Her entire physiology is oriented toward one function, producing every other bioform in the species and engineering what the next generation of them looks like. Her physical scale, across various accounts, is described as exceeding any battlefield deployable Tyranid organism, larger than a Hierophant-class biotitan in community assessments, though the Codex does not give precise dimensions, which is itself an interesting absence. What is confirmed from multiple sources is that her chambers span hundreds of meters within the hive ship interior, that she occupies those chambers fully, and that the closest equivalent in human architectural terms would be a manufacturing facility rather than a throne room. She eats continuously. The Lexicanum specifies that she requires a constant supply of fuel in the shape of genetic material in order to reproduce or bring forth new Tyranid life forms. When a planet is stripped of its biosphere, all organic mass dissolved, processed through the digestion pools, drawn up through capillary towers and fed back to the fleet, the Norn Queen is the endpoint. She absorbs the biomass. She runs it through structures that the 2017 Bell of Lost Souls lore examination describes as genetic shredder organs, biological systems that disassemble consumed DNA down to its component structures and integrate useful sequences into a reserve. That reserve is what Lexicanum calls the gene bank. The disassembled DNA structures form a gene bank, which provides the raw material from which new creatures are created. Every organism the fleet has ever consumed, every genetic sequence absorbed from every defended world and every fallen enemy goes into that bank. She doesn't just eat the planet, she catalogs it. Every Tyranid organism alive traces its origin back to a Norn Queen. The cloning mechanism through which she reproduces is the only reproductive pathway in the species. There is no Tyranid reproduction that bypasses her, not the smallest ripper, not the largest hive ship structure. All of it comes from her chambers, from her gene bank, through her biological templates, expressing her design decisions about what the next wave needs to look like. Tyranid bioforms carrying orc genetic material have been recovered and documented. Bioforms incorporating Space Marine gene seed characteristics have been identified in the composition of organisms deployed against Astartes garrisons. These aren't accidents, they are design choices. The relevant sequences were absorbed, evaluated against existing templates, and incorporated where they provided marginal improvements in combat performance. The Magos biologists of Mars cataloged the implications in a passage preserved across Codex editions. The Tyranids are, without doubt, the most rapidly evolving creatures in the galaxy, with developmental DNA leaps between broods that would take other beasts millions of years to achieve through natural selection. One campaign, one planet, one set of absorbed genetic sequences. And in the next wave, the next fleet, the next engagement, those sequences are operational and distributed species-wide. The Norn Queens communicate with each other through the hive mind's psychic network, cross-referencing results from different fleet engagements, debating, in whatever form that process takes for organisms operating at this scale, how a design might be refined. Once a revised template is produced and tested, the Lexicanum notes that the blueprint on how to clone her new creation is deployed out to the other known queens. Not just the local fleet, all of them. The entire species updates simultaneously. She is individually conscious and self-aware. Multiple codex sources describe Norn Queens as possessing genuine sentience, distinct from the collective drone state of most Tyranid bioforms, capable of creative decision-making in bioform design, engaged in something that functions like strategic reasoning. This distinguishes her from the synapse creatures below her in the hierarchy. A hive tyrant embodies the hive mind's will and executes it brilliantly, but the Norn Queen is somewhere upstream from that process, contributing to the architecture the hive mind draws on rather than simply channeling it downward. Understand the command structure clearly before you continue, because the horror only works once you have the hierarchy right. Synapse creatures, hive tyrants, Tyranid warriors, zoanthropes, are the nervous system of a planetary assault. They relay the hive mind's will to the organisms below them, maintaining the coherent intent that turns a tide of individual biological killing machines into a coordinated tactical force. Remove the synapse creatures and the lesser organisms revert to instinct. Kill the hive tyrant and the fleet loses direction. This is the standard Imperial counter-strategy. Decapitate the command structure, let the swarm become a manageable mob. Imperial xenobiological records preserve a note from the technomagi that complicates this picture considerably. Some Imperial technomagi believe that hive tyrants are the consort minds of the Norn Queen that forms the repository of the hive fleet's own collective consciousness, which would mean they completely embody the hive mind, but their destruction wouldn't diminish it in any way. Sit with the architecture that implies. If the technomagi are correct, the hive tyrants, the creatures it takes a full strike force to remove from the board, the organisms that can tear through a space marine dreadnought and walk away, are extensions of the Norn Queen's consciousness deployed into the battlefield environment, not commanders in their own right, instruments of a larger mind operating through them at a remove, their battlefield experience feeding back upward toward the architecture that generated them. The destruction of a hive tyrant in this model isn't the decapitation of a command structure, it's the interruption of a data-gathering session. This is also why the Swarmlord's revival happening on one of the hive ships isn't a logistical incidental. The Norn Queens live on those ships. The revival process occurs in their direct environment. Every memory the Swarmlord accumulated, everything it learned in the engagement at the Feral World, or the campaign at Macragge, or the duel at Ball, goes back through the hive mind's network to be processed by the organisms whose biological function is to process exactly that kind of tactical data and produce better versions of things for the next invasion. The Norn Queen's individual death isn't the equivalent of killing a commander either. The inquisitorial records preserve a designation for what happens when a queen is killed, the Hydra effect. Her death produces a psychic shockwave through the hive mind severe enough that nearby hive ships spontaneously generate replacement queens. The destruction of a node triggers reproduction of the node. Remove one and the system grows new ones. In Graham McNeil's Warriors of Ultramar, the novel that provided the physical description of a queen above, the invasion of Tarsus Ultra, one Norn Queen is poisoned during the campaign. That death is an event in the narrative. It isn't a resolution. The fleet continues. The architecture redistributes. The only confirmed canonical killing of a Norn Queen in Black Library fiction ended with the Hive fleet continuing its operations. You can't decapitate the Norn Queen hierarchy the way you decapitate a synapse network. It doesn't have a head. It has distributed nodes that produce new nodes in response to being killed. This isn't a strategic weakness, it's a strategic feature. Return now to the Feral World. Mark Collins' story, Duty Unto Death, is structured as heroic military fiction. The custodians hold. The Swarmlord is present. Wave after wave of increasingly lethal Tyranid bioforms crashes against a small group of warriors who are supposed to be the finest soldiers the Imperium produces, and the story's architecture is built around demonstrating that claim. It's, as Track of Words put it, short, action-packed, and built on the Custodian's one-man army aspect. It delivers exactly what heroic 40K fiction is designed to deliver. Golden warriors against darkness. The line holds. The question that heroic victory framing structurally prevents you from asking is what happened to the data. Here's the mechanism drawn from the codexes. Before and alongside any Tyranid planetary assault, Alpha Swarm bioforms, the initial wave, the disposable scouts and probes, are deployed partly as biological reconnaissance. They die on contact with defended positions, and as they die, they relay environmental and tactical intelligence back through the psychic network to the fleet. What killed them? At what range? Under what weapon profile? How many? In what configuration? In what amount of time? The intelligence feeds upward continuously, updated in real time as the engagement progresses. The Norn Queens receive it. The gene bank is already open. The Swarmlord's specific contribution is richer still. Its revival process, confirmed across multiple editions, restores not just biological function, but the complete tactical memory of the encounter. Everything it observed, everything it assessed, every strategic decision it made, and the result of each one. When it renewed contact with the hive mind after that feral world engagement, before the approaching fleet arrived, that renewed contact was a data transfer. The performance parameters of Custodian Guard under sustained assault from a full Tyranid hive fleet, their physiological ceilings, their tactical doctrine under saturation pressure, their specific combination of training, augmentation, and combat psychology, expressed as observable behavior across a real engagement rather than theoretical modeling. The Magos biologist's formulation is useful here. Developmental DNA leaps that would take other beasts millions of years to achieve. The Tyranids accomplish this across a single campaign cycle, not because they hold ancestral memories spanning geological time, but because the Norn Queen's gene bank allows them to compress what natural selection would require millions of years to produce into the span of one conflict. The heroic victory at the Feral World was, simultaneously, a compression event, a contribution to the ongoing project of making the next wave harder to stop with the same techniques. Every Tyranid bioform that died on that world taught the ones being designed in the hive ship chambers something. The ones designed in response to Custodian-grade combat performance will be different from the ones designed in response to standard Astartes performance, more precise in the vulnerabilities they target, better calibrated to the specific physiological envelope of the organisms that killed their predecessors. The Custodians held that battle, on that day, on that world. The story ends there because heroic fiction ends at the moment of triumph. The Norn Queen's process doesn't end there. The moment of triumph is her starting data point for the next iteration. This is the specific horror the Swarmlord's apparent vulnerability has been concealing. The frustration, this Primarch equivalent creature that keeps losing to named heroes, isn't a flaw in the Swarmlord's characterization. It's a description of its function. It doesn't need to win the individual encounter. Its memories survive the encounter regardless of outcome. The tactical data from the loss is at least as useful as the tactical data from a victory. Every loss is a controlled experiment in the specific conditions required to bring it down, conducted against real opponents with real equipment in real combat. The Swarmlord is a data collection instrument with 4 adamantium-cutting blades. The Norn Queen is the analysis laboratory waiting for the results. In August 2023, GW published an official design article tied to the 10th edition launch and the release of 2 new Tyranid models, the Norn Emissary and the Norn Assimilator. Both products released as part of the same dual-build kit during the Leviathan box set period. The Warhammer community article was titled, The Hive Mind Speaks, How the Warhammer Studio Created Such Towering New Tyranids, and it contains the most explicit public statement GW has made about the Norn Queen's position in their own setting. Designer Mark stated, "We wanted something that fit in the same hierarchy as the Hive Tyrant and the Norn Queen, something that had to look like it could easily outmatch even a Hive Tyrant." Then, in the same article, "It's not a Norn Queen itself. Such a creature is too valuable to be planetside, but it's an expression of their will, distilled for the battlefield." Read through what that statement confirms. The Norn Queen exists. She is canon. She sits above the Hive Tyrant in the faction hierarchy. Both new models were explicitly designed as expressions of her will, and she herself can't appear on the battlefield because the cost of her deployment would be too high to justify, because she is too valuable to risk in a zone where she could be killed or captured. GW named the product range Norn. They placed the Norn Queen in the design brief as the hierarchy anchor. They sold both models on the premise of her existence and her authority over the species. The Lexicanum's entry on the Norn Emissary, sourced from the Crusade Tyrannic War supplement, confirms the lore function. They act as assassins after being supplied with their prey's psionic spore, tracking a specific target through its psychic signature and eliminating it. The Norn Assimilator is a fortification breaker and prey hunter, every surface bristling with stabbing and puncturing elements, designed for the largest and most heavily defended targets on any battlefield. Both creatures are the Norn Queen's will, made flesh, sent to the surface while she remains safe in her chambers above. The community had been anticipating the Norn Emissary concept for years before 2023, according to discussions in the Tyranid Hive forums, where the prospect of any Norn-adjacent model being officially confirmed was treated as a long overdue acknowledgement. The products arrived. They were received enthusiastically. One community response noted that the Norn Emissary, with its assassin profile and connection to the Hive Mind's strategic intelligence, was the closest thing to a xenomorph queen aesthetic the faction had produced. A comparison that acknowledges something GW's own design language was quietly gesturing toward. And still, no Norn Queen novel. No short story structured around a queen as the central perspective. No Black Library protagonist who gets close enough to understand the interior logic of what she is. The most detailed physical description of a Norn Queen in published English-language Black Library fiction remains the passage from Warriors of Ultramar, preserved largely because community members archived it rather than because GW directed anyone toward it. The Norn Assimilator's lore depth in the Crusade supplement runs thin compared to equivalent named character releases from the same period. The Norn Emissary has a few paragraphs of fiction in the campaign supplement and a Lexicanum entry. The creature both products are explicitly named after, the creature GW described as too valuable to risk on a battlefield, the creature positioned above the Hive Tyrant in their own published hierarchy, has received no equivalent creative investment. GW acknowledged the Norn Queens enough to name a product line after them. They confirmed in print that both new models are expressions of the Queen's will. They sold those products on the premise. Then the narrative development stopped. The products exist. The Norn Queen's narrative does not. The silence after those two sentences in the design article is more conspicuous than the silence before the products launched. Before the Norn Emissary, you could argue the Queens were simply underdeveloped. After GW explicitly confirmed their position in the hierarchy, named products after their concept, and cited them as the in-universe authority over the new models, continuing to provide minimal narrative depth about what a Norn Queen actually is starts to look like a structural choice rather than an oversight. The Catan offer the most instructive parallel for understanding what GW does when it encounters an entity with power levels that resist the heroic narrative format. 3rd edition introduced the Catan as near-omnipotent star gods. The Nightbringer alone, in the original lore, had traumatized the living species of the galaxy so thoroughly during its active period that biological fear of death had been encoded into collective subconscious across multiple races. This isn't an entity with a proportional tabletop power level. It's an entity whose canonical existence implies a kind of horror that 40K's standard heroic fiction can't contain or resolve. You can't write a satisfying 3-act arc around a protagonist defeating something that has already made every living thing in the galaxy afraid of death. GW's solution was fragmentation. The Necron Codex revision retconned the C'tan into shards, pieces of their original selves, each shard retaining formidable power, each small enough to occupy a datasheet and fit inside a Black Library novel as a contained antagonist with a manageable threat profile. The Nightbringer has a model. The Deceiver has a model. The Void Dragon has a model. GW solved the omnipotent entity problem by dividing the entity into pieces. Each piece is deployable. Each piece is defeatable in an individual engagement. Each piece can be the villain of a story that ends with someone winning. A Norn Queen can't be shattered. She isn't concentrated cosmic power in one dramatic physical form. She is a distributed biological system embedded across multiple hive ships. Her influence expressed through every bioform the fleet deploys, rather than through any individual physical presence. Fragmenting her isn't a narrative option. There is no shard of a Norn Queen that retains a fraction of her power in a form that fits on a gaming base. She doesn't work that way. The Chaos Gods present a legitimate counter-argument. Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Khorne, all non-duelable strategic intelligences of cosmic scale, receive enormous narrative coverage from Black Library, hundreds of novels, endless short fiction, entire series devoted to their schemes and their wars. GW demonstrably can build sustained fiction around entities that don't personally show up to fight. But the Chaos Gods have infrastructure the Norn Queens lack entirely. They operate through named mortal agents, champions, possessed warriors, favored sorcerers, who carry the patron's will into individual scenes where characters make choices, face consequences, and create the kind of interiority that anchors long-form fiction. Abaddon is Chaos's sword arm with a documented history spanning thousands of years of Black Library publication. Ahriman is Tzeentch's regretted instrument, with an entire novel series tracing his obsession. The Chaos Gods themselves rarely manifest physically because they don't need to. Their named, dual-capable, morally complex proxies do the narrative work. You can write a 3-novel arc about a single Chaos champion without the patron ever appearing directly, because the champion is interesting enough to anchor the story. The Norn Emissary was released in August 2023. It has no named individual emissaries with documented histories. No mortal adjacent viewpoint character exists through whom an audience can experience the Norn Queen's perspective, because there are no mortal characters in a Hive Fleet's interior. No emissary has yet developed the kind of established lore presence that would make it the spine of a Black Library series. The Chaos Gods accumulated their champions over decades of continuous creative investment. The Norn concept has 2 years and 2 models. The deeper structural problem is this. The Chaos Gods don't threaten the heroic narrative. They feed it. Every Chaos God creates heroes by creating the champions, corruption arcs, and epic struggles that give protagonists something to strive against and fail against and occasionally defeat. The Chaos Gods are the engine of 40K's heroic fiction as much as its villains. Their cosmic power makes individual human and superhuman choices more meaningful, not less, because the stakes of each choice are cosmically high. The Norn Queen makes individual choices irrelevant, not in a nihilistic way, in a biological one. Every choice a hero makes against the tyrannid swarm, every tactical decision, every sacrifice, every weapon fired, and every position held, gets processed back into the gene bank and used to design something better for the next wave. The heroic framework assumes that being good enough to win today means something about tomorrow. The Norn Queen is the case where that assumption breaks down entirely, where today's best performance is tomorrow's calibration data. The avatar of Cain deserves a single line here because the pattern is worth naming. A God-shard entity of theoretically enormous power that, in practice, gets killed on a schedule by whoever needs the narrative moment. GW at least gave the avatar a model. They committed enough to give it physical form. The Norn Queen has never received that courtesy. A 2023 community analysis of Black Library faction representation found that Imperial faction perspectives account for over a fifth of novel output and more than a third of novella output. Tyranid perspective narratives don't register as a significant separate category. This isn't evidence of malice or conspiracy. It's evidence of a structural constraint built into the format. The majority of Black Library production runs on heroic military fiction, a named protagonist, a dual-capable climax, a line of resistance that can either hold or fail in a way that feels like it means something. The Norn Queen doesn't anchor that format. She doesn't fight. She designs what fights. Her power is expressed in the precision and lethality of what she sends against you across decades of iterative testing, not in any confrontation that could end with a protagonist standing over her body. This is why the Norn Queen is buried, not because GW forgot she exists. They confirmed her position in their own hierarchy in print in August 2023, in an article explaining why they couldn't build a model of her. Not because she lacks canonical power. The evidence accumulated across 35 years of Codex publications puts her above every battlefield organism in the species she designs. Not because she's narratively uninteresting. She is the most interesting entity in the Tyranid faction, the intelligence that converts every defeat into a lesson and every enemy's best performance into a design brief. She's buried because the story her canonical power level requires can't be told in a format built around heroes winning. She is the specific case where winning doesn't end the threat, where the hero's best day is simultaneously a data point in a centuries-long optimization project being conducted by an organism that will outlast the civilization doing the celebrating. A creature you can't duel because she doesn't come to the battle. A creature you can't kill in a way that resolves an arc because her death triggers more of her. A creature you can't sell as a worthy opponent to any individual hero because in every confrontation the hero can win, she isn't the one who shows up. The Inquisitorial Field Report, archived in the Tyranid Codex, tries to convey scale. We have given the horror a name to salve our fears. We call it the Tyranid race, but if it's aware of us at all, it must know us only as prey. The Inquisitor was reaching for something, the sense that the species doesn't register individual humans as meaningful, that the scale differential makes the idea of being noticed by the hive mind seem almost presumptuous. What they underestimated is more specific. The Norn Queen isn't too large to notice individual humans. She notices exactly the right details about them. Their weapons, their tactics, their physiological performance under specific stress conditions, their patterns of adaptation and resistance across multiple engagements. She notices precisely the things that are useful to incorporate into the next generation of bioforms designed to fight them. You aren't too small for the Norn Queen to notice. You are exactly the right scale to be cataloged. The case assembles cleanly at this point. The Norn Queen, designated Tyrannicus primogenitor in inquisitorial xenobiological records and called the Splicer Beast in informal imperial documentation, creates every Tyranid organism in existence, from microbial phage cells to the structures of hive ships, through a gene bank assembled from every organism the fleet has ever consumed or encountered. When a revised template is produced, the distribution goes species-wide. The blueprint is deployed to every other queen in the fleet network. She receives tactical intelligence through the Alpha Swarm feedback mechanism from every engagement. She is individually conscious and self-aware. She is so integrated with the hive ship that the boundary between organism and vessel is genuinely unresolved in canon. Her death triggers the Hydra effect, producing replacement queens from nearby ships rather than reducing the fleet's total capacity. In August 2023, GW's own design team confirmed in print that she sits above the Hive Tyrant in the command hierarchy, that both new Norn products express her will, and that she can't appear on the battlefield because she is too valuable to risk there. She has no official model. She has no sustained Black Library narrative. She has a description from Warriors of Ultramar and 2 paragraphs of Crusade supplement text attributed to the models bearing her name. The creature GW named a product range after, confirmed as the authority over those products in their own designer article, has received less narrative development than the Lictors updated in the same product launch. When you understand what a Norn Queen is, an organism whose gene bank converts every defeat into a future advantage, whose iterative design process compresses what natural selection requires millions of years to achieve into the span of a single campaign, who treats Primarch-equivalent creatures as field instruments, and the heroic victories that defeat those instruments as useful performance data, the silence around her stops being puzzling. It becomes legible. She is buried because properly acknowledging her, building the fiction that her canonical power level requires, following the lore to its logical conclusion, means telling a type of story Warhammer 40,000 was never designed to tell. A horror story, one without a heroic answer at the end. One where the line held by golden warriors on a feral world. The chapter master who dragged himself off the field at Cold Steel Ridge. The legendary duel at Bale aren't the narrative's resolution, but its dataset. The victories are real. They hold the line today. They contribute to something being designed in a hive ship chamber that will test whether they can hold it again tomorrow. Better calibrated, more precisely targeted, arriving with the lessons of every previous holding action already built into its biology. She doesn't arrive at the battle. The battle arrives at her records. The next one is already in production. Subscribe for more stories like this.